I'm here today to do my Book of the Month review. This video is going to be the same format as my previous video. It is one half spoiler free. Back half will be spoiler filled when I do my questions and just some spoilers I want to chat about, and I will let you know when I get to that point. Weird scheduling and just like some issues getting the book to myself, I ended up not doing an announcement, and so the book I picked this month is An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This is a low fantasy kind of contemporary novel. It takes place in, I believe it was New York, in modern day time period. The story itself is about the unseen world, which is the world of magicians. And what is happening right now is the turning. This is a cycle that happens every 20 years, and it's a opportunity for houses to vie for power, to duel, to become the most powerful house in the unseen world. And it also allows magicians not in a house to fight to establish themselves and get a house of their own. This round, with this new turning happening, you have a newcomer. Her name is Sydney. She is not part of a house at all, but she is insanely powerful, and she's kind of turning the unseen world on its ear and really giving everybody a shot for their money. And it's very interesting as it plays out as she goes through the turning cycle. It's an adventure in this unseen portion of New York City with lots of intrigue and lots of manipulation and just a lot of magic to get where they want to get everybody where everybody wants to go. So that's all I really have to say in summary. With this, I will move on to my likes and dislikes. This format is still the same as before: 3 likes, 3 dislikes. And I'll start with my likes as usual. My first like is actually the magic system here. It's not, I wouldn't say it's as fleshed out as your typical kind of hard magic system. It is a little bit softer, but it does have very defined limits. There is a very specific way magic works, and within that, the magic has very definite limitations. It was very interesting the way it functioned, and I liked a lot of the synesthesia that they used to describe the magic and how it was being cast. My second like is the writing style. I found it very easy to consume. It wasn't too flowery. It was very straightforward, very well written in a way that was easy to read as you go without getting stuck on a lot. It was also written in multiple perspectives, which I personally very, very much enjoy, and that also again increased my like of it. There wasn't anything wrong with the technical writing as far as I could tell. It was just very easy to consume, because it was written that way, and it was written in multiple perspectives, which allowed for the world to be fleshed out quite a bit as you went. My third like is the plot. Just the overarching story, the idea of this kind of unseen world, the turning, and how all of that works, and the social dynamics of it, and just where the plot started, everybody's motives, and where it ended. I found it all very intriguing, and I really enjoyed reading through it with the characters. But not every book is perfect. There are dislikes, and I have 3 for this book. My first dislike here is that you hit the ground running. And I don't typically dislike this as a style of writing, but it made it hard to get into the book here. A lot of people that I saw review this book before I read it, and then I agree with after reading it, is that the front third to half of the book, you are just struggling to catch up to where everybody is in the story. And I don't mind that as in storytelling much, but it took so long to catch up with where the characters were that it was almost too sudden of a drop and go to really allow you to acclimate really well. That being said, second 2/3 to half of the book was amazing, really well paced, and everything just really clicked, and I couldn't put the book down. My second dislike is that the characters didn't grow that much. Part of this has to do is with that it was standalone until recently. I guess they just announced that there's a sequel, but because of that, I felt like certain things weren't as fleshed out because all of the information was trying to get put out in a single book, and because of that, I felt like some of the character development took a back seat. And it isn't that the characters weren't interesting. I did find them interesting, but their growth over the course of the story didn't seem to be any development or growth. Additionally, I found a few reviews that talked about Sydney being too perfect of a protagonist, which I found very interesting. I don't think she developed much either over the course of the book, but it's just something I found that was kind of interesting, that I could see some people really disliking and therefore attributing to a dislike of the book. And my third dislike is the ending. Although I found the book really well written and the plot was really intriguing, I felt like the ending was a little bit rushed, and that certain things and certain decisions weren't as well discussed as I would have liked. And so there was a few things where I don't necessarily think that you got hit cold turkey with it. Like, you definitely knew these things were coming, but you thought it would be discussed a little bit more, or at least openly, before it happened. And just because some things weren't, it felt like it was just, the ending was compressed into as few pages as possible to get it done. And while that being said, I still liked the ending. It was just written very compactly, and it felt rushed because of the time frame they used with it. That is all of my likes and dislikes. I will move on to my characters. So with the characters, I'm not really going to talk about too much. I'll talk a little bit about Sydney. She's kind of your main protagonist, and then I will mention a few small things about the side characters, and that's about all I'm going to say today. So with Sydney, I do agree with a lot of people that she was very, very overpowered. Although I think as you get to know her and her background, I think it makes a lot of sense, and that, to me at least, her skill is justified. But if you read the book and you think otherwise, you think that it is not justified, leave a comment below and we can talk about it. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. But even just as a character herself, outside of her magic, I actually really enjoyed her. I found her very intelligent. I found her very strategic. I found her very interesting to read, especially as I discovered her motivations going forward. That added to my enjoyment of reading her perspective, because there was a lot of things going on, and I really appreciated the way she was able to observe everything based on her history growing up. The other characters are very similar to Sydney in some sense, in that they never really seem to develop over the course of the book. Their personalities are pretty stationary, pretty static. But I don't feel like any of these characters are dimensionless. It's just, this was a short novel and they didn't have a lot of opportunity to grow. This book was very much about the plot and what was going on in the world, as opposed to the story of the characters. That being said, none of the characters were uninteresting, but a lot of the side characters, and even Sydney, really fill kind of like their character archetypes. They're a little bit cookie cutter characters. They fill very specific traits and they're very specific personalities, but I feel that they are well written and they all are presented very well by the author. And that's all I really have to say about the characters. I will do a quick wrap up for those of you that are going to watch only the spoiler free, and then after, you can stay tuned for my spoiler section of this review. So in terms of rating, I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and when I finished it, it was like 5 stars even, like no doubt in my mind. That being said, I have sat back and thought about it a little bit, and the things I enjoyed and the things that stuck with me, and I'm going to scale the 5 back just a smidge. My rating for this book is 4.5 out of 5. The things that I enjoyed in this book, with the writing, it was very technically good. It was easy to consume. The plot was very interesting. The characters were interesting, even if they didn't develop. And there was a lot of things that were written in such a way that it really appealed to me and my opinion. And so because of that, it really bolstered my enjoyment of the book. And the dislikes really weren't major enough to outweigh the things I enjoyed. Like, yes, the book took a little bit to get into, but like that 2/3 to second half of the book were amazing and just really, really pumped the book up, in my opinion. And that, along with the magic system that was very well defined, even if it wasn't discussed in depth, the characters, even though they weren't They didn't grow, they weren't dimensionalist, they were interesting. The plot was interesting, and just overall, I found the book to be very well written, which allows me to give it that high of a rating. So for those of you who were only watching the spoiler-free portion, I will see you guys in the next video. And for those of you that are sticking around for my spoiler chat, I'm going to start with my book club questions. Alrighty, so I did 6 book club questions. I've scaled it back because I'm also going to discuss some spoilers. And my first question is, what was your initial reaction to the book? My initial reaction to the book was kind of a mixture of like intrigue for the situation. It's described very mysteriously. Just the way Sydney comes out and performs the magic and gets the text saying she's hired. So that in itself was very, very mysterious. So it was very intriguing. And then just also the spell she cast got me kind of being like, whoo, magic. Like I haven't read a lot of fantasy that have been really heavy on the magic recently. Like I did do Lord of the Rings, but at least in that series, the magic wasn't the focus, and here magic was the entire focus. It was like the plot driver with just the turning and the magic failing at the duels and how things are going and like the House of Merlin's role. So like magic was just a huge portion of it, and I just got super stoked reading that first chapter to find out how intertwined magic was going to be with everything that was going on. My next question 2, is what is your favorite chapter or scene? And I have to say mine comes from, it's one of the earlier duels they do. It's a duel, I can't remember what the specific criteria was, but Sydney's opponent was going to cast a nature spell of some kind to produce a forest, and they just ended up kind of losing control, and their magic failed them as a result. And although it was horrific and I could tell this person was in pain, the way the situation was described, like the way the spell was being cast and what the spell was presenting, sounded beautiful. But I also really liked the implications of the magic failing, because until that point, any of the failing magic had been very small. There hadn't been a lot that was on such a public and large scale. And I really liked, because that's when everything turned, and the implications of the failing magic were so much more serious, because this person did die as a result. Sydney saved them by acting as a conduit, which she had learned growing up in the House of Shadows and being used as a conduit for other magic casters. My third question is, how did the characters change throughout the book? The characters didn't really change throughout the book. Like there's a few like circumstance changes, but overall their personalities didn't really change, and the characters themselves didn't really grow and develop as the story moved forward. 4, how did you feel about the ending? I already talked about it. I disliked the pacing with which it was written, but I loved the ending itself and the way it was structured overall. While it was rushed, they did have like a really interesting resolution. It was not one without consequence, which I really liked. Like there were just these really valid and really solid consequences for everybody that was involved. I liked how Sydney made the sacrifice. I like how everything blew up into this final battle. So overall, mostly liked the ending, just didn't like the speed with which everything was resolved. Question 5, would you read another book by this author? I definitely would. I loved this book. I loved the style of writing. I loved the use of multiple perspectives. I loved how grim the tone was. And I really, really enjoyed it. I actually found out that a sequel for this was recently announced, so it is moving from a standalone to a series, but I'm very excited because I did enjoy the world that was built up in the first book, and I really enjoy Kat Howard's writing style, so I will be definitely picking up that second one. And then question number 6, does this book remind you of any other books? And although the overall tone is different, like the story is quite grim, there's a little bit more kind of dark and gritty tones with it, just in how the world is kind of dealt with. The unseen world are very mafia-like, but it does remind me of Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. And the reason I say that is just because they're both low fantasy. They are both based in modern day, but the societies really both have like these deep historical roots, even though in the unseen world in New York they're not quite as old. But just that idea of mixing low fantasy with a contemporary situation and just how they mash up and how everything's dealt with, and even the magic is very similar in terms of limitations and some of the physical effects that you can get. It's not a perfect match, but I think if you liked this one, The Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich would be a good choice, keeping in mind that the main character in that one, as I said in a review I did for it, his character's a little bit more bumbling, and the tones are not as dark and gritty as they are in this one, but it would be a step I would recommend if you enjoyed this book. And with that, I will just move on to the few spoiler things I want to chat about. The first being Ian Merlin and Sydney's relationship. I was worried when they first did that kind of like initial kind of meet cute. I was a little worried about how it was going to play out, but it ended up being super good. They didn't do insta-love, which I adored. It was insta-attraction that developed into like a caring relationship. That was the first bonus. The second bonus was that it definitely wasn't the main focus. Like, yeah, her interactions with him were largely romantic in nature once they really got going and their relationship developed a little bit, but that wasn't the focus of the book, and that I really liked. So I don't mind like a hint of romance, but I hate when they set like when a book is set up to be like fantasy or sci-fi and then a romance aspect just takes over. I don't enjoy that as much. But this was really well done, having this like strangers, instant attraction, grow to love. I also really liked the idea of the House of Shadows, just that idea of the contracts and the shadow being part of your contract, and the way the magic world, the unseen world, just really kind of shits on it, even though that's the reason so many of them are so powerful. And within that, I really liked the connection to the House of Merlin and the fact that the only reason he's been in power since the last turning is because he established this house and changed how magic was cast for the future. It's, like I said, I really found it interesting that using different spells, they were able to use the people in the House of Shadows as conduits and channel magic through them to circumvent the physical issues that you get with casting magic. I also found it really interesting the way the magicians treat it. Like, they kind of just ignore it and don't talk about the fact that that's why they can cast magic so well, and they can cast it without having those physical effects. I found it really interesting how that was so woven into the current society of the unseen world. Third thing I want to talk about is Grey Prospero. Caught me off guard a little bit to have a serial killer in this novel. But I do really enjoy the way he went about trying to bolster his magic after an accident. It made a lot of sense because there's so much handwork in all of the spell casting that the way they described the magic being residual in higher levels in the hands really made sense. Super gross that he like ground it up and like would eat it and mix it into shit. Like, that was nasty beyond belief, but it was very interesting and logical the way he got to that point, and I really, really appreciated that. But it was just a very disturbing situation with a very disturbed character. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the unseen world itself. I really liked the mafia-like tones here. Like, the unseen world really was just like the underworld, the dark, gritty underbelly of the city. And I really appreciated the way that the magicians in the houses talked with each other, struggled for power, had like specific contracts and like treaties and stuff. It was very interesting, and I'm actually very excited to have found out that there is a new book coming out in this series, because I'm excited to see how the society plays out even more, and as the world gets fleshed out a little bit more, how everybody kind of views. I'm hoping to get more of how everybody views the unseen world from different angles. And that's all I have. So for those of you who stuck around for this spoiler-filled portion, thank you very much. If I missed anything important or you want to talk about something specific, leave a comment below. I will talk with you as soon as I possibly can. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye.